When I first set foot on Maplewood Lane, I told myself it was nothing more than a practical move, a clean slate, the kind of fresh start people dream about when the past feels too heavy to carry. After all, I was coming out of the wreckage of a long relationship that had drained me of both energy and hope. The breakup wasn't just the end of a romance. It felt like the end of who I thought I was supposed to become. I needed quiet. I needed space. I needed air to fill my lungs again. At 34, I shouldn't have felt so old, so hollow, or so weathered. But heartache has its own calendar. It adds years to your soul even when the mirror hasn't caught up yet. So Maplewood Lane seemed like the right answer. The street was charming, almost idyllic. Maple trees stretched high and proud on either side, their thick branches forming a protective canopy, brushing against each other like the hands of old friends who refused to let go. Children zipped up and down the sidewalks on their bicycles, their laughter echoing between houses. The neighbors, most of them long settled here, waved warmly when I drove past. It was the kind of place that seemed to promise healing, even if quietly. My house wasn't grand by any stretch, but it was mine, and that fact alone gave me comfort. White siding, a little porch with peeling paint, a swing I had sworn to myself I would use every evening, and just enough yard for a small garden that I wasn't even sure I could keep alive. It wasn't perfect, but it had potential, much like me. For the first few weeks, my life was all about unpacking boxes, hanging curtains, making endless trips to the hardware store, and finding a rhythm at my new job with a local design firm. My evenings were quiet, a cup of tea on the porch, the sun setting behind the line of maples, the simple comfort of silence wrapping itself around me like a blanket. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't looking for anything. And then one evening, I noticed Thomas. He lived directly across from me. A 60-year-old man who carried himself with the calmness of someone who had seen storms and survived them. That first time he was on his porch, a thick book in his hands and a steaming mug balanced on the railing beside him. His silver hair caught the last light of the day, and though his face bore the lines of age, his eyes carried something different, a mixture of weariness and kindness that I hadn't seen in a long time. I must have lingered on him longer than I realized, because when his gaze lifted and met mine, I panicked and looked away, embarrassed. But instead of ignoring me, instead of pretending the moment hadn't happened, he smiled. Just a small, gentle curve of his lips. The kind of smile that disarmed you, made you feel seen without being judged. Instinctively, I smiled back before retreating inside. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Just a neighbor. Just a polite exchange. Nothing more. But that was the first thread in a story I never expected to live. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle. Then, one evening, as the street glowed in the golden haze of sunset, Thomas called across the narrow strip of lawn. "Porch swings are meant to be shared, you know. Care to join me?" I froze. Sharing space with a stranger wasn't something I usually did, and even though he was my neighbor, it felt oddly intimate. But his tone was warm, not demanding, and there was an openness in his expression that eased my hesitation. So, I crossed over. The swing creaked softly beneath us as we rocked in rhythm. At first, our words were simple. The weather, the neighborhood quirks, the beauty of the maple trees arching over our street. He told me he had lived here for over 30 years, raising his children in that same house. Then, his voice softened, and he spoke of his late wife, Margaret. "She loved this porch," he said, staring into the distance. "We sat out here every evening just like this." There was no bitterness in his tone, no overwhelming grief, just a quiet reverence for a love that had shaped him. I didn't know how to respond, so I listened, and somehow, in the safety of his presence, I began to open up too. I told him about my own heartbreak, the years I had spent in a relationship that vanished overnight, the dreams I had held of marriage and children, and the reality of being left with nothing but boxes of memories I couldn't bear to open. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer shallow reassurances. He simply listened, really listened, with a depth of attention that made my words feel less heavy. By the time the sky shifted into deep navy, I felt lighter than I had in months. That night, as I walked back to my little white porch, I realized it had been the first real conversation I'd had in a long time. From that evening onward, Our paths intertwined naturally. Sometimes we talked late into the night. Other times, we sat in comfortable silence, rocking on the swing with only the sound of cicadas and the occasional rustle of leaves. He showed me his garden, where roses Margaret had planted years ago still bloomed. He taught me how to care for them, chuckling gently at my clumsy attempts. On weekends, he would fix things for me, a chair with a broken leg, a door hinge that squeaked. Wood tells you when it wants to be fixed, he told me once. People do too, if you listen closely. That line stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after he'd said it. The neighborhood began to notice us. Some smiled kindly, others whispered behind their hands. After all, I was 34. He was 60. To the outside world, it was odd, even questionable. But with Thomas, I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt valued. Slowly, I stopped caring what the whispers said. One Saturday, I wandered into his garage workshop. Sawdust dusted the floor like snow. Tools hung neatly along the walls, and the air carried the scent of wood and varnish. He was sanding a piece of oak, his sleeves rolled up, his hands steady. "Ever build something with your hands?" he asked, looking up with a grin. "No," I admitted, laughing nervously. "Well, today's the day." Together we built a birdhouse. It was nothing grand, but when it was finished, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He patted my hand lightly, his eyes twinkling. "Sometimes it's not about what you build," he said softly, "but what you feel while you're building it." I didn't realize it then, but those words described what was quietly forming between us. One evening, sitting beside him on that same swing, I looked at him differently. The lines on his face, the steadiness in his presence, the warmth in his silence, it all stirred something deeper in me. This wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something else, something scarier and far more vulnerable. I avoided him the next day, overwhelmed by feelings I didn't know how to process. But Thomas noticed. That evening, he knocked gently on my door. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern softening his voice. And before I could stop myself, I confessed, "I think I care about you more than I should." I braced for discomfort, for rejection, maybe even pity. But he only smiled, gentle as ever. "Emily," he said, his voice steady. "There's no such thing as caring too much when it's real." My heart raced. For the first time in years, I felt whole, not broken, not too young, not too old, just me. From then on, our bond grew. We shared meals, stories, and laughter. He taught me about patience, resilience, and kindness, not through lectures, but through the life he quietly lived. At a neighborhood gathering months later, I stood by his side. For a fleeting moment, I wondered again if we looked strange together. But then he caught my eye, gave me that steady smile, and the doubt melted away. One quiet evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees, I leaned against him on the porch swing. The roses in his garden swayed with the breeze. "I'm glad I sat beside you that evening," I whispered. He placed his hand over mine and said simply, "So am I, Emily. So am I." And in that stillness, I realized something I wish I had known years ago. Love doesn't care about rules, timelines, or expectations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, unexpectedly, and exactly when your heart is ready to receive it.